Hello there, thank you for joining me again today. Today's video is about the Marconi 2955 series of radio test sets. Here we have all the 4 different models of the Marconi 2955. We also will whip the lids off the 2955B and the R model, which has got the sensitive receiver inbuilt into it as an option. So we've got today on the bench, we've got a 2955 at the bottom, which is the very first model that came out. We've got the 2955A model, the 2955R with the sensitive receiver option. So we'll take the lid off that and show you the sensitive receiver internally in that. And then we have the 2955B, the white test set, which was the last of the 2955 models. And then on the bench we've got some accessories, we've got a printer, we've got some of the Marconi accessories that came with these that you could order additionally, power heads and some filters underneath, which I'll show you. But basically the start of it all, back in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, was the 2955 radio test set from Marconi Instruments. And this is the instrument at the bottom here. Now this particular test set had a 30 watt RF port on the bottom there, which was for the RF. Now as far as the service manual is concerned for these radio test sets, the 2955 model on its own, because this was the first generation, the RF attenuator section internally is the same as what it is on the 2955A, which has got the 75 watt port there. So really I could never understand why the 2955 was only rated to 30 watts and yet the 2955A, which uses the same RF attenuator within it, was allowed to have 75 watts continuous. But basically you can put quite a bit of RF power into these test sets above what it actually states on the front of the instrument on the N-type socket. It says in the service manual that should the RF power be excessive, then it will cause thermal heating inside the RF attenuator section, and that will then cause an alarm to display on the screen saying remove RF power because the RF attenuator's got too hot. So quite interesting how the 2955 radio test set at the bottom is only rated to 30 watts. I have seen some 2955s, although there aren't many, where that is rated to 75. It actually says 75 watts on the front of the instrument as well. So yeah, bit strange. So that was the very first one that came out, the 2955 on its own. And then the other models came after it. So once the 2955 had been out, became the 2955A model. This was a sort of a more souped up version of the one below, insofar as it had updated firmware on it and various bug fixes, and indeed had obviously a 75 watt rated port for the N-type, and there weren't much other differences really. With all these test sets, of course, you could order options such as GPIB, data bus outputs, high stability oscillator, various other options as well that were in the catalogue that you could purchase to be fitted within them. So they came about, the 2955A, sort of in the early 80s to mid 80s upwards to just before they started making these in the early 1990s. And so these sort of had a decade lifespan, and they're still quite popular today all over the world, still used. Then after that became what was a sensitive receiver models that you could then pick up off-air signals and analyse the off-air signal that you're receiving from the antenna, because these two test sets weren't sensitive enough on the low power 1 watt ports to receive antenna with an antenna connected. Rather, they weren't able to receive off-air signals from distant radio stations. They were sort of more concentrated on local signals from a handheld radio in the workshop, or connecting up to something that was low power on this port. So they weren't able to receive off-air signals. So I think they became more aware that for hilltop radio repeater sites you needed the Marconi 2955R model, and the R model had the sensitive receiver module built in, and that enabled you then to be able to listen to off-air signals. Now on the Marconi 2955A, you'll notice there's a button blanked out, which is on the blue buttons there between the tones and the bar charts, and this button here does nothing when you press it on a 2955A. However, on the 2955R it says TX monitor, so when you press that, then it goes to this additional screen, and then you can literally receive off-air signals. So when you select this particular port here and then connect up an antenna, which we've got here, so we'll just put that on and then put up an aerial, put a frequency in, for example. You had a squelch control as well, so we could put a frequency in, 101.1 megahertz for example, and then you can set the IF filter up for different sensitivities. Just pull the aerial up a bit. You can set up all sorts of different parameters on this radio test set for monitoring off-air signals. And what it will do, it will then measure the signal that it's been receiving off the antenna, and you'll be able to hear that through the speaker, and also measure the levels as well remotely, which was quite a good feature for when you were at hilltop radio sites. Instead of having to connect or disturb the repeater by disconnecting the antenna output on the repeater and connect it to the test set to measure it, you could do all the talk-through measurements using the radio test set. And one of the things that you could do with the 2955R at a repeater site is you could stick it in the equipment room, and you could send out a signal on one port and get it to receive the signal on the other port, and that would then put the repeater into talk-through basically, and you'll be able to monitor the talk-through audio levels as well as the RF levels. So that was a good feature that Marconi brought in as well, and basically turned the radio test set into a receiver, an off-air receiver. And then after that model came the 2955B radio test set, which is what we've got here. And the 2955B was really the transition from Marconi's older looking colour schemes, which were these colours, which were quite renowned across the Marconi instrument range. It doesn't matter what instrument you had in Marconi from the 70s, 80s, they all had these colour keys on, they all had this same paint and colour cabinet, and they started to move over into the white coloured test sets then, and that seemed to be the in design at the time, so, and more ergonomically friendly to the user, such as rubber keys. These keys are rubber on here, whereas they are plastic with clicky sort of tactile switches. Now I prefer the old keypad than the newer ones, simply because the old keypads, when you pressed the buttons, they actually made a proper clicking sound, and you could, you knew you pressed the buttons. On this test set, when you press the buttons, sometimes they don't actually respond until you give them a right good push, and you sort of get used to it, but it's just that they're a bit different, that's all. You used to be able to drive these quite quick and just type in really fast your frequency, whereas on these it's more of a slower process, because you're having to concentrate on dialing in the levels, frequencies, etc. more intently by pressing the rubber buttons in, which are more resistance to push. Then came all the accessories, obviously, which consists of these power heads here, which essentially turned the 2955 into a bird through-line power meter. Basically, it allows you to transmit up to, I think it's 500 watts or above, which is more than the test set can handle on its own. And indeed, it can measure forward and reflected power, peak envelope power for AM and SSB signals as well. There were two models of those that came out. One covered from 1 to 30 megahertz, which was the sort of HF version, which is this one, directional power head, 1 to 50 megahertz rather. And then we had the 25 meg to 1 gigahertz, 1000 megahertz one as well. And then we had other accessories as well, such as the printer, which actually gets its power from the front socket. You plug it into the accessory socket, which powers the printer, and then the printer then produces via a data connection here the GPIB port that allows us then to connect off to the rear of a test set, and then it can do a printout of what's on the screen, or a conformance test, or whatever you want to pass fail limits, etc. There was a piece of software that you could get for these, which I have somewhere, but I can't find it at the moment. It was called Pmr Test, and it was a piece of software made, well, manufactured by Marconi. They sold it with the test sets, and basically Pmr Test was just an iBasic program that ran GPIB sequences to control the test set, so that you could program it to do conformance testing on receive transmit measurements, sort of an ATE, automated test equipment principle, and that was common across these all this range of radio test sets. So inside the 2955R radio test set, to show you the sensitive receiver, if I can just remove the top cover. Now obviously don't do this at home when the test set's on, so obviously we'll get an electric shock, but I know what I'm doing. So inside the 2955 R radio test set, it's very similar internally to what it would be on the 2955A. This being the R model, the sensitive receiver, that's where the sensitive receiver module is. It's actually fitted just here. So this module here is a sensitive receiver module. That's the RF power attenuator that connects to the N-type on the front socket down here, and attenuates the transmitter power coming in from a transmitter. And then we've got the system cards in here in this enclosure. On the underside of the instrument, which you'll have seen on my other repair videos, we've got an RF tray which deals with all the signal processing and RF signal processing. Here, this is an additional module which isn't found on the normal 29 series test sets. It's obviously for the 2955R, some kind of coaxial RF switch that must switch this module in or out, being a sensitive receiver module. And it's a different setup internally. The RF attenuator sections further below. So they've moved things around a little bit in the 2955R, and then it's got its own connection, which is between the CRT tube on the motherboard. There's a ribbon cable goes down there and connects to a socket that's an option that's a sensitive receiver down there. So that's how that option's added. So it's not just a case of bobbing the module in, there are other components which need to be fitted as well, and some additional wiring and cabling, etc., which is not found on the other radio test sets. So it was quite an in-depth retrofit for Marconi to do. Now on the 2955B, which has got the same innards as the 2955A radio test sets, that's what we've got there. So we've obviously got the step attenuator for the receive signal generator, the TX RF attenuator, which again is for the N-type input. That's where the transmitter power is dissipated into. Again, all the system cards in there, and then down there there's actually a a connection down there for sensitive receiver as well. So if this had the option fitted, it would be down there. Now you can notice on this radio test set as well, there is a button that does say TX monitor, but when you press it, it obviously says sensitive receiver not fitted. Now that's obviously an option that had to be paid for additionally to be fitted to these radio test sets, but you can see Marconi made an effort to rather than have the button blanked off like it is on the older 2955As, it's blanked and it doesn't show anything, whereas on the 2955R it's actually, you know, it's actually there. So they've continued that theme by having the TX monitor fitted there. Obviously there are different software versions as well on them. If we have a look at the 2955A, for a start off, if we could just press the help button, then that's obviously on software version 10, 1992. On this one, how to do that, and that's on the 2955R, software version 6, 1989. And then on this one we obviously got software version 4, 1994. And you get extra things, you know, for example on the help menu we've got some extra text here, whereas on these there's not as much text. I dare say when you go into things like transmitter testing, etc., that perhaps it contains some additional information which isn't on the other help menus and things, that add-ons that people have thought, oh, that could be doing with being added, you know, it'd be helpful. All sorts of little things like that as well. So just one or two little bits, extras on them, but you know, they're basically all the same really with regard to how they operate. And so yeah, that's a little rundown of those. Now there were other accessories as well that you could get for these. If you watch the NATO video I did on the NATO tactical communications test set that I did, which is a 2955A that came in a green pelly case with its like there was two, a small case and a large case. The large case contained the Marconi 2955A in it, and then the small case contained a load of accessories. And basically the large case had a like the test equipment, test setting with all the cables and tactical radio cables for connecting to things like Pmr, MOL, military defence radios, and various other radio equipment in the RAF and the Navy. And they had all the different leads for different types of radio transceivers and microphones and handsets, so you could test them. But there was also a box that came in there which allowed expansion, if you like, of the test set capabilities, and that's a good video to watch, although I will show these working in a moment. In addition to that as well, if you look at that video, I also show all the accessories that come with these as well, that above and beyond what's shown here. So that's a good little video to watch. But as well as getting these modules that turn the test set into a VSWR meter, which I'm going to show in a mo, you got additional things like these little filters and military radio handsets could connect in on the right hand connector there, and then that basically expanded it to be capable of testing on the Marconi. So obviously that connected in to get power, and then the audio lead will plug into the Marconi to allow different handsets and headsets to be tested. This again was a 600 ohm line interface, particularly for things like talk through systems that use 600 ohm lines, and certain types of radio systems. So again, that was another Marconi add-on, another little box that they produced. Now, insofar as the VSWR meter is concerned, and the RF power meter that goes up to 500 watts, this cable's provided with the remote power heads, and that just merely plugs into the accessories port on the front, and then the other end of it just connects into the device that you've purchased with the unit. And so if I connect that up, I'm working one-handed again. So as soon as you connect it to the device, I'll just try and put that there if I can do it. Have to forgive me a moment, I'm just working one-handed. So as soon as that makes contact and connects up, then it will, if I can do it, if I can get the damn thing to go in. There we are, look. So it turns it into an RF power meter. So we've got forward power, reflected power, and then VSWR. For got an antenna. We've got a peak envelope power and CW. So you know, we can use it for measuring SSB signals, AM, CW, and obviously if it's on CW it also measures FM when it's on a CW reading. So it gives you that information in 3-bar graphs of what's going on with your antenna system, etc., and then obviously what power, direct reading, and the VSWR ratio. And again, this particular unit can handle up to, I think it's about 500 watts or something. Tells you on it somewhere, estimated limits. I'm sure it says in the manual it's something about 500 watts. I think it's it mentions it somewhere. Yeah, it does. It says something about 500 to a kilowatt, something like that. So it's quite a handy little unit. You know, obviously for using with different types of antennas and transceivers, etc. So that's quite handy, especially for HF. Not only the other one as well that works up to 1 gigahertz. So that particular unit, again, the same thing. Quite useful again for VHF, UHF up to 1 gigahertz. So it's quite a handy little unit. Then of course we've got the what is the printer, a dot matrix printer, which again gets its power off the accessory socket, and then a GPIB interface connects into the rear of a test set and to there. And this is obviously quite old technology, but still works. So still printing out. It's a test print. That still works. After all those years. And you know, forget all the laser jet stuff. You know, we've got dot matrix, and it's probably one of the reasons why the Ministry of Defence chose that accessory for their NATO tactical communications test instruments, because it's bomb proof. You know, that's not going to break down. So yeah, and then of course we've got these are audio attenuators made by Marconi as well, and again 20 dB audio attenuators, quite well constructed in metal enclosures for interfacing between radio audio outputs and then the front of the unit. So they're just some of the accessories that are available. There's also a little light that I've seen that plugs into the accessory, but it's like a little inspection lamp. Must be for using internally within radios, you know, to light up or illuminate a dark part of a radio. And I do have somewhere the other box which I was hoping to show you, but I'm just trying to find it where it is, but it was the accessories box, and it was the one that I've featured in the NATO Tactical Communications Test Instrument video, if you watch that. I've no idea what I've done with it. It was here yesterday because I was looking at it, but I don't know where it is. So I shall try and find that to show you. But it was a little green unit that larger than the filter units underneath, but it enabled military radio and also a voltmeter expansion as well. So yes, I'll find that and then we'll add that in. So this is the other box that I was trying to find, which comes as the Marconi accessory. This I featured in the other video on my channel, which is in the NATO military communications test set video. But basically this little box is similar to the other smaller boxes, where it adds additional functionality to the Marconi 2955, in that we've got quite a bit on there. We've got different types of military radio or radio handsets, and radio equipment can plug into these sockets, and then we've also got general audio in and out, a radio frequency amplifier at the end there, although it's only rated 1 to 400 megahertz, and then we've got an AF gen function as well, function switch, and these can basically mimic microphone inputs, handset inputs, things like that. And we've also got a voltmeter multiplier, so we can use the test set potential with higher voltages, which some military radios and other radios that are designed to work with this test set can produce quite high voltages. And the AF outputs on the DVM, the digital voltmeter function, that's in the radio test set, where when it's under receive test, for example, or AF audio test, you can flick this to DC, so it reads DC volts, but that's only rated up to a certain voltage. I think it's about 40 or 60 volts, something like that. Any higher and you damage the test set, whereas at least by using these multipliers it potentially takes the voltage a much higher, so you can use this box to interface between it. So again, that's a little rundown of the Marconi accessory there that can connect into that. Insofar as the RF routing differences that are on the Marconi 2955R sensitive receiver, traditionally on these test sets, the BNC input jack would also carry very low level signals coming in, up to a maximum of 1 watt and no more, otherwise it damages the instrument. But that isn't capable of receiving off-air signals, as I said earlier. So basically, when we select the different option there to select between ordinary test set environment and sensitive receiver, what happens is that the RF signal that comes in from the antenna socket here is obviously very low in microvolt level, received from an off-air antenna, and that has to be amplified because the test set needs about 1 milliwatt, around about that in level, in order for the test set to lock onto a frequency on this port normally. So what there is, they've added, obviously, as we said earlier, this additional module and this RF relay, but this is a 4-port RF relay. So basically the way that's configured is that it can allow RF from the BNC socket to come in, and when the sensitive receiver option is not enabled, it'll allow the RF to go through and go into the circuitry in a normal manner and then be analysed by the test set in a normal way. However, when we select the sensitive receiver, this relay clicks in the other way, and it's configured its inputs and outputs so that any RF signal coming in goes into this module, gets amplified up. It's a multi-stage amplifier, and then the output then is fed back through the relay and then back into the sampling circuits within the test set. So additionally, there's supply voltages on here and logic levels as well. We also have logic inputs from the control board, which allow us the additional functionality of choosing the different higher and lower imagers, different IF filters. All the RF parameters that are looked at there are dealt with by that module. Indeed, the microvolt level and the sensitivity and strength and all that is read from that module on that frequency and then conveyed on a data bus to the control board via this ribbon cable here. So that's how that works. Now, to remove that, there's just two screws. There's one there and one at the end. Obviously you have to remove all the rigid coaxial cable assemblies, and if you need to test this relay, obviously you can do that by removing these, unscrewing these ports, and then checking the continuity across the contacts. I do believe a circuit diagram for that is in the Marconi 2955 service manual as well, if ever you get an issue with one of those that you need to repair. They are not too bad to repair. I've done one or two repairs on the sensitive receiver module already, but they've been mainly component failures within them, and these RF relays can get dirty, and by switching between normal mode and sensitive receiver mode can sometimes make this work erratically, but this one seems to work okay. So at least you've had an overview now of the differences between the three different models that are in the old colour scheme, from the 2955 to the 55A to the 55R model, and then obviously the internals and a quick demo of the 2955B. I mean, obviously when you're connecting a radio up or something like that to one of these test sets, you've always got to observe the correct ports that you're connecting a radio to on the front, otherwise you'll cause damage to it. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you want to know more about radio testing and how to test radio systems on equipment like this, then please have a look at my other videos on the channel. They do go into some in-depth detail on testing and maintenance activities on radio equipment, as well as radio test instruments like these, and we've got some other test gear to show, but we're just still on the 2955 series at the moment before we move on to the other models of radio test set, other than the ones I've demoed already. We've got a 2945 repair video coming up. We've got Aeroflex, Tektronix, Keysight, Roden Schwartz test gear reviews and repairs as well coming up on the channel. So if you like the video, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again later on. Bye now.